Distinguished hosts, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking Ambassador Connix and the other conference organizers for inviting me to participate as a moderator in this most timely panel on women, peace, and security. It's timely first, of course, because the 15th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was just celebrated last October. This resolution, as I hope everyone is aware, reaffirms the vital role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflict, and therefore of the importance of women's equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of international peace and security. It's also a timely panel because Canada's House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development is currently conducting a study of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And last but not least, it's timely because of the priority that both the European Union and Canada wish to give to the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We have a panel of 4 speakers who are very well qualified to provide us with insights into, first, the institutional experience, whether from foreign affairs, the UN, or the European Union, into the practical challenges and modalities for integrating the women, peace, and security perspective and agenda, into the planning and execution of peace and security missions, and as well to provide us with an academic perspective on the challenges of operationalizing the women, peace, and security agenda in the field. I'm going to follow my predecessor's panel moderator's excellent example of not using valuable time to go through the wonderful CVs of the panelists. I would refer you to them on the website. And what I will simply do is elaborate a tiny bit, perhaps, on the panelists before turning it over to them. Professor Stéfanie von Hlatky, as it says in the program, is director of the Center for International Defense and Defense Policy at Queen's University. But I would add to that she is currently a Fulbright visiting research chair at the University of Southern California's Center for Public Diplomacy. So that means that while our European colleagues, union colleagues who flew over, faced somewhat cooler weather than they had expected, we have a Canadian colleague who has definitely flown into a cooler environment. Our second speaker, Ms. Päivi Kannisto, is chief of the Peace and Security section of UN Women. UN Women being the UN organization dedicated to gender equality and empowerment of women. Ms. Anne Burgess is the Director, Conflicts Policy and Security Coherence Secretariat of Global Affairs Canada. And I have to say that if you wanted a mandate, conflicts, policy, and security coherence has to be the one you want, although, of course, delivering on it is a challenge. Maybe not as big a challenge as implementing, as operationalizing the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, but getting there. And last but not least, Ms. Clara Ganslandt is head of division of the European Union Common Security and Defense Partnerships and Agreements Division. Those are our speakers. I note that they will each have a maximum of 10 minutes to make their opening comments. At the 2-minute mark, I will just try and quietly indicate to them that they have 2 minutes. After they've all made their presentations, I'm not going to put a specific question to them, but I'm going to ask each of them to reflect or make a comment on, having heard the other panelists. And then I want to open it up to you, the conference participants, for your comments and questions. So with no further ado, I turn to our first speaker, Professor von Hlatky.
10 minutes is a real challenge when you're an academic. So thank you, Ambassador Kannisto, for organizing this conference, and to the team also for a really masterful organization. I'm very happy the theme of women, peace, and security has such a central role in the program. And I was asked to provide the academic perspective, which I'm well suited for, and I'll also tie that into the book I'm currently writing on gender dynamics in the armed forces. So the first question I asked myself is really what academic debates and the scholarly literature could bring to the table in terms of discussions of implementation of women, peace, and security. And the first one is probably to bring some conceptual clarifications, because when you read the policy documents and the guidelines, you see terms like gender mainstreaming, gender balancing, the gender perspective, gender-based analysis, and these terms can seem quite daunting to even the most experienced professional in the security and defense field. Next, I think that the scholarly literature has a lot to bring in terms of studying the variation that we see when we compare the representation of women in the foreign policy elite and security and defense organizations across Western democracies. Even though we're talking about a fairly homogeneous group of states, the variation is quite remarkable when these groups of states are compared, whether you're looking at the EU or NATO. So I definitely think that more work is warranted in this field. There's definitely a wealth of literature out there, but what has struck me in the review of the literature is the extent to which the bulk of it is written from a feminist or critical perspective. And what I would encourage then moving forward is for the study of gender issues, but from a variety of theoretical perspectives as well. And here, when I say feminist scholarship, I don't mean feminism in terms of the persuasion that women and men should be equal, but I mean feminism as a distinct body of work in academic scholarship. So what has struck me with the realization that there's such a strong emphasis on these critical perspectives is that, to me, that's an indication that gender has not been mainstream in academia and in academic research. I think that we should see more analyses in terms of cultural analyses of gender roles in different societies and political systems, the mechanisms through which different organizations, either governments or international organizations, incorporate these gender reforms as part of their work. And thirdly, to better understand and be able to explain how these ideas and norms are diffused across international organizations. So the first point I'm making is to stress that gender, yes, can be an analytical lens, but it's also an object of study that benefits from a variety of theoretical approaches. I would say that this idea that gender has not necessarily been mainstreamed in academic work also holds true for our curriculum. When you look at courses in security studies and international relations, gender is very rarely introduced. If it is, it's usually as a distinct subfield of the social sciences or political science, gender studies, as opposed to being embedded in introductory courses, which I think ultimately, when we're thinking about training the next generation of policy experts in the security and defense sector, we're doing a huge disservice to university students who are trying to understand these issues. So I like to conceive of gender analysis, and certainly I bring that to my courses on international politics, as a skill worth practicing. And certainly it's increasingly valued in policy circles, it's increasingly valued in the military for operational planning. There's this increased awareness that incorporating a gendered lens can yield to interesting nuance. For example, Status of Women Canada has developed a tool called the GBA Plus tool that teaches civil servants the skill of gender-based analysis, and they are now partnering with the Canadian Armed Forces to tailor this approach to the military following a directive from the Chief of the Defense Staff from earlier this year. In the international realm, certainly gender analysis has increased in its visibility. There has been the UN He for She campaign launched by Emma Watson, and there has also been a lot of public criticism against the phenomenon of all-male panels on programs, or manels, as it's called, with the hashtag on Twitter, women also know stuff. So if you're looking for more women on your program, just ask me. To paraphrase Mitt Romney, I've got binders full of women experts to recommend to you through the organization Women in International Security Canada. And of course, there's the legacy, which Peggy Mason mentioned, of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, and the follow-on resolution that has really taught the international community that conflict affects men and women differently, and that this awareness, this realization, should be part of our understanding of the full spectrum of conflict. So I can stand here and profess the importance of integrating gender analysis into all of our work, but I'll tell you a few reasons for why that I think this is critically important. First of all, I think that self-assessment for everyone of their own professional organization is something that is hugely beneficial. So ask yourself, what is the proportion of men versus women? Are there still enduring professional barriers for women in my field? In the military, you probably know, in a country like Canada, it's about 15% of women in the military, 1-5. But it's certainly not better in my field. In academia, in the field of international relations, you have between 20 to 30% of women there. So why is that the case? I think these are useful questions to ask. And then finally, and most importantly, because it's not just about the representation of women, but are the voices of women being heard in decision-making processes, and are these voices being taken into account? Bless you. Second, it's useful to help solve policy problems. Here, I mentioned before that policies should take into account of how they may impact women and men in different ways. And this should be considered at the front end, so during the decision-making stage and certainly prior to implementation, because if we omit to consider the policy impact on 50% of the population, the women, failure is likely, okay? But I also want to end on a positive note. And here I wanted to talk about the very positive changes and evolutions that have occurred in the security and defense realms, and certainly it's very interesting to note that in the military, specifically in the armed forces, and this is part of the research from my book, greater gender awareness has really translated into some noticeable adaptations. So first of all, across Western democracies, there's certainly a trend towards a more corporate mentality when it comes to the benefits for the men and the women. 2 minutes? Okay. For the men and the women, so that they can achieve a better work-life balance as part of their work. Then there's this idea of benchmarking exercises, so certainly NATO has done that, and as more and more countries are engaging in national action plans to monitor the implementation of 1325, you're seeing more comparisons and more sharing of best practices across countries, sometimes subtle public shaming, but this is an adaptation that has been noticeable. There has also been greater gender awareness through the prism of cultural awareness, and we've seen this through operations from the one in Afghanistan to Congo. This idea that better gender awareness can yield operational advantages has now been incorporated in the armed forces. And certainly that was important in Afghanistan for knowing where to build schools, and also understanding that women soldiers may be able to talk to the female population and then tap into a brand new source of intelligence for operational planning. And finally, I would say that also the inclusion of more women soldiers sends a strong symbolic message in some of the countries where Canada or the EU is operating, because the physical presence of those women sends a message to local populations about perhaps different perceptions when it comes to gender roles. My time's up, so I'll just end on a comment that is relevant for this particular conference, is that I do think that organizations like the EU, but also the UN and NATO, have really had a pivotal role in developing toolkits and guidelines to inform the implementation of women, peace, and security initiatives, and I think that's very important and worth noting. And I also think that panels like these are very important to start sharing information about some of the implementation challenges, and I know that the speakers that will follow me will contribute to that discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm truly honored to be in this symposium. Thank you for inviting, and indeed thank you for making women, peace and security such an important part of the agenda. I thought I will provide you with 3 examples where United Nations works for peace and security and promotes the implementation on Resolution 1325. I start with Syria. Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura is facilitating the implementation of a peace plan endorsed by the UN Security Council. It calls for a Syrian-led process that establishes credible, inclusive, non-sectarian governance and a new constitutions and free and fair elections within 18 months. His work is supported by Women's Advisory Board. It contributes to a better understanding how to address the Syrian crisis. Voices, concerns, and experiences of women from different backgrounds are integrated into the design and content of peace talks, and they are mainstreamed into the process and future agreements. This support enhances Syrian women's capacities, agency, voice, and coalition, building a strong constituency for peace with strong social base. UN Women's collaboration with Syrian women's groups for peace started over 3 years ago when the previous peace talks were going on. At that time, there was no room for women's participation in peace talks. May I say there was no peace either. We follow with very keen interest now and with strong support what happens. According to research carried out last year, women's inclusion increases chances for peace and chances for lasting peace. My second example is from Mali. UN mission is operating within a counter-terrorism setting, and we heard that very clearly this morning as well. Evidence shows that anti-women's rights messaging is used to radicalize and recruit extremist fighters, and that very specific targeting on women's rights, forced and early marriages, use of human trafficking to finance terrorist groups. So these are the mechanisms used. Recently, UN Women shared early results of a research carried out in Mali. It indicated that for young people that had joined extremist groups and when left that group, women in the family were in the majority of those trying to persuade the fighters, mainly young men, to abandon the group, stay, find another alternative. Those who encouraged the former fighters to continue fighting were mainly men in the family. Mind you, there were also women who joined the extremist groups because they felt they found no other way to be heard and taken into account. This information was shared in the first meeting of the informal experts group of the Security Council in February this year, and this experts group was established on the basis of Resolution 2242. Several recommendations were given in that experts group including recommendations including MINUSMA, which is the UN mission in Mali. Strategic review should include gender analysis, and this links very much to previous speaker. Within the conflict analysis, that gender balance of a mission could be improved, because missions, be it UN, EU, whatever, they always serve as an example also to the society where they are. and that dedicated capacity and expertise on gender equality and women's protection must be strengthened. According to the research, the research I'm referring to is a global study on a 15-year implementation of women, peace and security. It says dedicated gender equality expertise is crucial for ensuring that women, peace and security is taken into account in missions. And it needs to be at a high level enough to make an impact in missions. My third example is then from Liberia. UNMIL is now preparing for transition when Liberia will take full responsibility for its security in June. The mission is scheduled to close down in December 2016. UNMIL is training relevant institutions and their senior leadership. UN conducted a gender audit at UNMIL. A capacity assessment of a Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection has also been done. Gender equality considerations have been included in constitutional reform, security sector reform, decentralization and governance reform, and justice sector as well as electoral reforms. Liberia is also a country where women-only contingents of peacekeepers have been deployed over the years. Liberia is benefiting from peace-building funds with strong gender equality focus. In spite of all these measures, in addition, the transition will still need a lot of strong support in the future, not least because Ebola weakened the institutions and the economy seriously. Peace is very fragile. Women's organizations will continue to have a major role in building Liberia's future and people's trust in country's own institutions. And we heard about resilience here before and state resilience. And women's organizations will need support to do that. Civil society organizations have a critical role in implementing women, peace and security in conflict and fragile settings. UN, member states, and civil society have collaborated for many years to respond to this need. One of the solutions now presented is the establishment of a global acceleration instrument, and that was launched in February, for the purpose of facilitating that civil society in conflict areas has resources to build peace and prevent conflict. These are just some examples I've given you. The 3 high-level peace and security reviews in the UN last year stressed that UN needs to focus on preventing conflict, sustaining peace, and ensuring that women and also other parts of society, such as youth, are involved. Women's participation contributes remarkably to operational effectiveness. That is what the study proved, but I think you all know that already. EU and Canada are highly valued as partners to all the work the UN is doing in women, peace and security. And I would like to add to previous discussion a little bit, saying that EU and Canada, perhaps in collaboration, can really make a change in how women, peace and security is truly implemented globally. Make it a way of operating in your institutions, invest in it, appear together in a global fora for it, make it an issue in political and military discussions you have with third parties. These are just some of the suggestions. You will change the world with this. UN Women and other UN organizations are looking forward to a strong collaboration also in the future with EU and Canada. And I think there is a lot of room to work in conflict prevention and building peace, like we have talked. Thank you very much for this leadership of making this an issue here, because it is always a decision by a leadership to prioritize this issue as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we've had 2 speakers who I think in different ways have very much made the point that if you want an effective, a durable solution, then you have to ensure that you include a gender perspective and include women in the development and the implementation of those solutions. And with that, I turn to our third speaker, Ms. Anne Burgess.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be included as part of this panel to discuss the important topic of women, peace, and security. I'm very grateful to our host, the EU delegation, and very pleased to serve with our moderator and my co-panelists, in whose company I must admit to being slightly intimidated. Moi, j'occupe un poste de directrice au sein du groupe de travail sur la stabilisation et la reconstruction aux Affaires mondiales Canada. Ma direction coordonne la politique canadienne sur le maintien de la paix, les opérations de la paix, la médiation, la prévention des conflits, les États fragiles, les mécanismes d'alerte rapide, l'évaluation des risques et la prévention des atrocités. Nous sommes en outre responsables du programme sur les femmes, la paix et la sécurité. Canada, along with our European partners, strongly supports gender equality and the promotion of the human rights of women and girls, their empowerment as agents of peace, and their well-being in conflict situations. In particular, we steadfastly support the International Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Canada was on the Security Council in 2000 and helped draft Resolution 1325. In fact, I sat in the drafting group for Canada during my first diplomatic posting. We've had the honor of chairing the group of Friends of 1325 since the resolution was adopted. I was asked to speak about how we operationalize women, peace, and security. In Canada, it's mainly operationalized through Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security, or CNAP for short, which was launched in 2010 as a partnership among Global Affairs Canada, the Department of National Defence, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The plan has a strong accountability framework with designated actions and indicators and a requirement for annual public reporting. Ministers have tabled in Parliament 3 annual progress reports, and the 4th and final is in preparation. I say final because CNAP sunset last month, but the government has committed to its renewal. We are in the planning stages of the renewal process, including with civil society organizations with whom we maintain a regular and open dialogue. In terms of our recent activities in support of the WPS agenda, we work internationally to enhance the role of women in peace and security through active advocacy, programming, and expert deployments. We speak regularly and forcefully at the UN Security Council, including on the protection of sexual violence in conflict. As I mentioned earlier, we chaired the Group of Friends on Resolution 1325, and we are active with our partners in the G7. We are promoting the meaningful participation of Syrian women and women's groups in the search for peace in that country. The Canadian representative to the Syrian opposition is the only woman so appointed, and she is using her position with some success to have women included in the opposition negotiating team. We have funded work to ensure that Resolution 1325 language is included in peace and transition documents. We have also funded the provision of expert female advisors to the Opposition High Negotiating Committee. We are very supportive of the work for the SRSG for sexual violence and conflict, Zainab Bangura. To give her important work added prominence, we invited her last July to brief members of the Anti-Daesh Coalition on her just completed mission to the Middle East to assess the terrible impact of sexual violence on primarily women and girls. In terms of Global Affairs government partners, Canada's Chief of the Defence Staff last month issued a directive for a 3-year program to institutionalize a gender-based approach to military operations. The RCMP is surpassing the UN target of deploying 20% women police officers to peacekeeping missions. In terms of better integrating WPS norms into the planning and execution of missions in a very practical way, I can offer 3 ideas we are examining based on our experience to date. The first is, with busy field practitioners, begin the conversation from first principles and not from the WPS agenda. Asking, are you fully implementing UNSCR 1325 will likely elicit a lot of eye rolling. Better to ask, how are women and kids getting along in your area, which will likely elicit a more interested response, which can then lead to a deeper discussion on whether and how the inclusion of women and a gender approach might be helpful in achieving overall mission aims. Second, be very aware but not intimidated by the local context. The gender situation will be differentiated according to local conditions. Small steps will likely work better than sweeping proposals offered from the outside. Third, seek professional gender advice, which is again contextually sensitive, and use gender advisors to transform the mission itself. Gender advisors will not fulfill their potential if their role is focused exclusively outside the mission or organization, for example, being the designated host for visiting women's groups. The role of the gender advisor is in assisting all mission personnel, including leadership, in taking a fully inclusive and gender-based, gender-sensitive approach. That role is essential not only for the benefit of women and men, but also for mission success. En ce qui concerne l'avenir, le gouvernement du Canada s'est engagé clairement à promouvoir l'égalité entre les sexes et les droits de femmes, aussi bien au pays qu'à l'étranger. Cet engagement se reflètera dans toutes les initiatives, donc cette année, un examen de la politique de défense, un examen de l'aide internationale, ainsi que le renouvellement du plan d'action du Canada. Sur la scène internationale, nous poursuivrons notre travail aux Nations Unies, où nous accorderons notre appui à des initiatives comme le Women Leaders Pipeline, visant à préparer des femmes à occuper des postes de haute direction dans le domaine du maintien et de la consolidation de la paix. L'anniversaire de résolution 1325 en 2015 a placé le dossier des femmes de la paix et de sécurité à l'avant-plan sur la scène internationale. Et nous devons poursuivre sur cette lancée. Pendant que nous procédons au renouvellement du plan d'action du Canada et au-delà, nous entendons continuer de collaborer étroitement sur ces questions importantes avec l'Union européenne et nos autres partenaires internationaux, nos partenaires au sein du gouvernement et, ce qui est très important, la société civile du Canada. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll ask Clara Ganslandt, last but not least speaker, to come forward.
So, as we heard already, 2015 was an important year for women, peace and security. The UN released the results of its global review, and the EU adopted its new action plan on human rights and democracy and a new gender action plan. And the appointment of the new EU principal gender advisor, Mrs. Mara Marinaki, in October, coincided with the release of the report from the UN regarding the implementation, the review on 1325. So this is another clear sign of the importance that the EU attaches to gender and resolution 1325. However, policies are only important if they are implemented. Or as 20 of our EU member states framed it in a non-paper that they shared with the EU in April last year, it is time to move from policy to practice on gender, peace and security. So to act on this and to be practical and concrete, we are now conducting a study, a baseline study on how we are integrating human rights and gender into the common security and defense policy. And this baseline study is a stocktake of how we are working on gender in CSDP. It looks how gender has been integrated into the planning and work processes of the CSDP, what result this work has had, how well women are represented in the CSDP, and how well we engage with women through our CSDP missions. I will now focus my presentation on the findings, the initial findings from this study, and a bit about what we do and currently how we work on gender in CSDP. So, firstly, what we do. Human rights and gender equality are fundamental norms of the EU. And these norms should underpin our foreign and defense policy and be implemented through our CSDP missions and operations. And this commitment is translated into policies through, for example, the EU Gender and Human Rights Action Plans that I already mentioned. This policy framework, this policy document is the framework for how we are working on gender in CSDP. And what we try to do is to integrate a gender perspective in the planning process, both at the strategic and the operational level. Secondly, we make sure that the CSDP operations mandates include some language on either the importance of integrating gender or even some specific activities that could be undertaken relating to gender or women's participation. Thirdly, what we do is to include gender and conduct and discipline as elements in the EU pre-deployment and in mission training. And fourthly, to include gender advisors, these are expert positions, or focal points, these are non-expert positions, at headquarters and in all missions and operations. The gender advisors are not responsible for integrating gender, but they should facilitate the process. And the fifth point is to ensure peer-to-peer learning through making sure that our human rights and gender advisors and focal points in the various missions and operations do meet annually, and that they also can share lessons and network via an email list that connects the headquarters and missions and operations. Now, what we have learned so far from this baseline study that I mentioned, and we are currently analyzing the feedback that we have got back, so it's really very tentative results so far. But the baseline study it has provided us with a stock take of where we are on gender currently. The fact that we are conducting a baseline study is important in itself, and it actually forces us both at headquarters and in missions and operations to answer questions about what we think about gender issues and how we work on them. As most of you working on security and defense know, quite a lot of the day-to-day work on security and defense does not involve using a gender lens or reflecting on women's participation. So it's good on occasion to be forced or encouraged to actually ask these questions. What did we find so far? Well, good news is that all our planning documents do include references to the importance of integrating a gender perspective. But we have limited strategic and operational guidance on what integrating gender concretely means for the different types of CSDP missions. We have executive, advisory, capacity building, training missions, etc. And how a gender mainstreaming mandate should be resourced. Secondly, 90% of the managers in the CSDP, myself included, we emphasized that we saw promoting gender and equality as being part of our responsibilities. But almost 60% of the same managers reported that they had engaged on gender only 0 to 5 times in 2015. So do we then view gender equality as important, but somebody else should do the job? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that are very useful to put to ourselves and to get some actual empirical replies back. Thirdly, some of the main challenges to integrating gender were highlighted as being lack of expertise and awareness in the CSDP, and lack of host country responsiveness and women's representation in the host country. A fourth finding is that turnover of staff in the missions and operations poses a real challenge to institutional learning and memory. The EU and many of its member states have committed considerable resources to pre-deployment training. And our missions do in-mission training, and in general this training does include at least brief introductions to gender and CSDP. However, the study showed that it's very difficult to ensure that all staff is trained. And in military operations, many colleagues only stay for 3 to 6 months, And in civilian operations, colleagues tend to change every year or every second year. And the fifth finding I'm going to mention is that it's hard to assess impact. As part of the baseline study, 7 missions were asked to conduct impact case studies. And what they came back with was stories of process. They told us how consulting widely, including with women's groups, had affected their planning and programming, or how establishing gender focal points in all sections of the institution contributes to better information flow and through that better planning and programming. And I see that my time is coming up, yeah, so, okay. Let me then just finally share with you a few concrete lessons from the impact case studies. So our missions in Georgia, that's monitoring, and Kosovo, rule of law, which are both large missions with sub-offices, have established gender focal point systems. And that is, both missions have an expert gender advisor at its headquarters that work together with gender focal points in sub-offices. And gender focal point systems are crucial for ensuring information flow inside an organization and making sure that gender perspectives are integrated into day-to-day activities. Our military training mission in Mali has from the beginning included very senior trainers on international humanitarian law, including the prohibition against gender-based and sexual violence into its training team. And this has ensured that the Malian recruits do not only receive theoretical training of international law, but an understanding of how and why international humanitarian law matters. And this is part of the practical training. And my final lesson here would be that our civilian security sector advisory and capacity building in mission in Afghanistan has worked extensively on increasing women's participation in the Afghan security forces, and have through this work also learned a lot about how to help ensure that women can work in a safe way in the Afghan police force. That is, no sexual harassment or violence. And we have learned from this that detail matters, management structure, conduct and discipline, design of office space, etc. So I will stop with this, but merci beaucoup pour votre attention et je suis contente de prendre des questions après. Merci.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, well, thank you very much for a very frank, I might say, and candid assessment of where the EU is at on this. And I think before turning to the audience, what I might just ask from panelists is if, having heard the variety of comments from the different institutional and academic perspectives from our panel, whether, what additional comment they might wish to make. And in that context, if they might wish to identify any areas where the EU and Canada, I mean, given the depth of effort that's going on either side, might cooperate. But that's an additional point I throw in if you do want to make a comment on that. And I guess we'll start at this end because.
Thank you, and I'm certainly eager to hear from the audience. Maybe to jumpstart the discussion, I'll highlight something that I think makes a link between this morning's panel, the first panel, and our panel. And that's the crucial issue of training, because I think that one of the challenges that has been highlighted by all of the panelists right now is that expertise is crucial, but that's primarily implemented through gender focal points and advisors. And certainly that's great to provide advice to leaders, but it's still difficult to have that awareness trickle down through the entire organization. And so how do you have that sustained training and professional development to make sure that this is really embedded in the practices? And the answer is training packages that are innovative, constantly updated, evidence-based, scenario-based, so that People don't perceive it as a box that needs to be checked, but as a skill to be learned and perfected throughout the course of their career, regardless of occupation. So certainly the EU and Canada have a lot to contribute in this respect, not going beyond sharing of best practices, but being really at the top of their game when it comes to training approaches.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take liberties and jump in here, and this will also tie back to the earlier panel. I'm taking the liberty because I think I qualify as the longest standing external faculty member of the Pearson Peacekeeping Center, our former International Peacekeeping Center up to the time that it closed. And one of the things that had been developed in terms of training packages was exactly what Professor von Hlatky just said about the key element of bringing the gender perspective to all elements of the mission and providing the tools to do that. So a bit of a pitch to the government, Canadian government side about how important a resource that was and how useful it would be to have again. And so I do apologize for taking liberties as chair, and please, Pacey.
Okay, thank you. What
Heavy.
What I was thinking when listening to both, actually all of you here, usually there is a lot of stress that women's capacities need to be built so that they can participate in peace processes, they can contribute to peace. It was actually Resolution 2242 now what made it clear that the capacities of those who are leading the processes, who are mediating peace, who are facilitating peace, who are leading peace operations, their capacities need to be enhanced to include and integrate gender equality into their operations and understand its value. So there needs to be specific effort on what, how those who are running these processes, how they are operating. And I think you also made that point in your presentation. And I can hear what you were telling about Canada and EU that is going on already in your activities. So I would say that one.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. I think I also, I was struck by something in Stéphanie's presentation, which was also echoed in Clara's presentation. And again, it does come back to training. And Stéfanie, you made the point that gender is not really mainstreamed in academic work, nor in curricula, in that it's often treated as a distinct body of study. And the point that I wanted to make is that this is something we definitely need to improve on in terms of training for our deployed personnel, military, police, and civilian, both here at home, as well as in the training that we offer in terms of foreign contributors of military, police, and civilian personnel. I think that too often gender issues and women, peace, and security issues, if I can bundle them together, are sort of a module or a slideshow presentation in between, combat first aid and convoy safety. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think we all, whether we said it explicitly or not, we talked about how gender awareness is important both for women and men on the ground, but it's also an essential factor in mission success. And we usually use that term in the military realm, but we also see this, the high-level review of the implementation of 1325 and most other studies definitely show us that this also holds true in the conflict prevention, mediation, and peace-building realms, that those efforts, so all those investments, which can be very expensive, have a much better chance of success and being sustainable when women are fully involved. In terms of, Peggy, the question you posed to us in terms of how Canada and the EU can work together, I think, I think the field is wide open in terms of how we can work together, where I think we can really sort of act as force multipliers to each other is in the area of advocacy on these issues in international forums. And also, I don't like to use the term burden sharing, so maybe I'll use the term opportunity sharing in terms of actually being very strategic. We all have finite resources, both financial and in terms of the possibility of deploying personnel abroad. So where we can ensure that our efforts are complementary, I think that would also be a great thing to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Just to come back to one point that struck me, I think it was in Stéfanie's presentation in the beginning also about the need to study the variation of female representation. And what we have observed in our baseline study is that we actually lack broken down statistics. So what we know is that in the civilian crisis management operations of the EU, it's more or less 25% of female representation. But for the military operations, we don't have any segregated data. But informal information suggests maybe 3 to 7%, but this is not any official data. But that our gender segregated statistics do not show then which positions women hold. So this would be something which would be important to know if we are to be able to then address and promote getting women into those positions where there are the biggest gaps. So I would just echo that observation of the need of such study.
Okay, and Päivi, did you want to make another comment before we go to the audience?
Discussions, and just to stress it, what came also up during the global study preparations, that women, peace and security resolution is not a gender resolution at all. Yes. It doesn't link to gender or women's empowerment. It is a peace and security resolution, and its main aim was to enhance the tools and available for conflict prevention. Yes. So just, wanted to make sure that people know that. And I would also like to react to Clara's, but just coming to UN, 3% of United Nations peacekeepers are women. So many of them are operating in areas where males can't talk to females. So you are missing quite a lot of security information in an operation if you have so little access to population who knows a lot of things because they are there and observing.
And that's one of the things, of course, that you can do in training, is you can set up a training situation where those being trained, say the military, or come across different individuals in the field in a situation, and it's the females that have the key information. And then if they ignore or don't listen to that information, then in the lessons, there are negative consequences. And then in the lessons learned afterwards, you can reveal who actually had the information, and that can be a quite powerful tool, training tool, to demonstrate the importance of listening to all. And listening to women. Okay, well, I think the time has come. Lots of great comments, I think, but I think the time has come now. We've got a good 20 minutes, and so I wonder if there are any comments or questions from the audience. Yes, if you put your hands up, then someone will come with the microphone. Oh, I think the other. Yeah, and then the second would be the lady with the stripe over there, because she did.
Yes, thank you very much.
And please, would you introduce yourself? It's just nice to know who's...
My name is Kyle McRoby. I'm with the Harvard University Club of Ottawa. I'd like to pick up on a comment that was made earlier in the previous panel discussion about the importance to our general security of enhancing the resilience of our societies, and in particular, the importance of youth education, especially female education. I'm wondering what specific exciting initiatives any of you might be aware of in this area. Thank you.
Now, should we take a couple? I think what we'll do is we'll take a few questions and then the panel can comment. So we have our first question on initiatives with respect to youth education and
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel for a great overview of a number of the challenges and issues at stake here. My name is Beth Warniak, and I'm with the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada. It's a network of individuals and NGOs here in Canada working on women, peace and security issues. Several panelists made reference to last year's global study on women, peace and security that was mandated by the Security Council resolutions. And one of the very, very striking findings of that study is that there is a huge implementation gap. That we have a lot of rhetoric, we have a lot of words, we have a normative framework, especially regarding sexual and gender-based violence and conflict, but we are lacking a lot of progress on the ground. We are lacking resources. Governments are very quick to line up to make statements, but when it comes to actually pledging money to this agenda, they have fallen far, far short. So my question to the panel is how do we move this forward in terms of bridging that implementation gap? What are the keys to garnering political will on this issue? Have you seen any successes? Anne offered us some entry points in terms of how to approach the issue in making it accessible to people, but I'm wondering if you have other suggestions on how we can move this forward so that in 10 years or 5 years we don't have another study that says that little has changed for women and girls on the ground in conflict-affected countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll take one more then, just one more question, and then we'll go to the panel.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Alla Bielewski. I'm the ambassador of the Republic of Moldova to Canada. And just before asking my question, I would like just to make a short point. It was interesting to observe that the role of women in peace and security has been today addressed exclusively by women. And even I noticed that there are less men in this room at the second panel, as if we do not acknowledge, men particularly do not acknowledge the role of women. But coming back to my question, I would like to say that it would be, we of course commend the Liberal government of Canada in ensuring the gender equality. We see this judging from the composition of the current government. My question would be, how much do you think the international community, and especially the countries represented here, and the international institutions are committed to support a woman in the position of the Secretary General of the United Nations? My question is not just accidental, because Moldova has appointed a woman as a candidate to this position, and I very much hope that she has stands very good chances. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll turn. We can have a further round of questions. I'm just a little, we've got a fair number that we've put out, so we'll go to the next round, I think. Okay, so maybe I'll start at the other end then, and there we've had three questions. The first about civil society initiatives to support youth education, including, of course, girls, in terms of enhancing resilience of societies. And then the second one, this, of course, definitely came through in the testimony to the House of Commons Standing Committee study into women, peace, and security implementation, what has been called by the questioner the implementation gap, and asking questions about how what are some key ways that we might close this gap. And then, of course, the third question, very interesting one, about how committed the international community is to appointing a woman. It would be the first time a woman would be the UN Secretary General. And of course, there's a very interesting new process, which is the process itself has been opened up in terms of a greater role than it just being the Security Council that more or less makes that decision. So with those are the questions. So we'll start at this end. And oh, did I say I was going to start at the other? Yes, I did. Thank you.
I'll give reply or a comment on the second question. And that is about this implementation gap. And one thing that I think would be very important is to be context-specific and engaging with women and girls in crisis and conflict situations. And this was also one of the key findings of the UN Global Review, because in case we want to ensure security for women and girls, then we actually need to listen to women and girls.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to comment on any or all?
Thanks. I'll make brief comments on all, but I think my focus will be on the implementation gap as well that Beth asked about. And Beth, I'm so happy to see you in the audience. Beth's network is one of our main civil society partners on WPS and CNAP implementation and renewal. In terms of youth education, particularly female youth education, I regret that I don't know the specifics of the broad range of programming that Canada does in this area. I do know that it is extensive. I know from my past work on Afghanistan, for example, that girls' education was one of our most important pillars of that work, and huge investments went in. So all I can do, I think, is agree with the importance that you've placed on that issue. I recently attended the Ottawa Peace Talks put on by the Centre for Pluralism here by Interpeace. And the emphasis on education and the importance of education for peace building could not have been overemphasized. In terms of the final question and how committed is the international community, I think there's a firm commitment to gender equality among certainly the United Nations. I agree implementation needs to be accelerated. I think that holds true of most UN member states. And I think there would be great delight to see a woman selected to become the next Secretary General of the United Nations. But what I think people would be most delighted with is to have the most suitable candidate, and the candidate that has the best chance of being effective in that role. And I think if that candidate is a woman, there will be double cause for delight. Finally, in terms of implementation gaps, I think, Clara, you mentioned in your statement the fact that the EU is conducting a study in order to have the evidence-based the evidence base upon which to move forward and to come up with policies and programs. I think that's really important. I think that evidence base is not yet complete in this area. We were speaking, for example, of the lack of data desegregated by gender in terms of leadership positions or high-level leadership positions within specific organizations and missions. The other one, and I know I sound like I'm always talking about this, but it really does come down to training and ensuring that the personnel we deploy and the personnel that other member states and partners deploy are trained in these areas and appropriately trained and meaningfully trained. I think that's why initiatives such as the new Train the Trainer Center that the UN is looking at in Entebbe are so important, because I know I recently heard from a UN interlocutor that they were very shocked recently when they called together all the individuals who had been designated within missions as the trainers for delivering training related to gender and WPS. And a large part of that cohort actually failed the training that they had been designated to deliver. So I think that's why those kind of initiatives are so important. Finally, the role of gender advisors and making sure, not only having gender advisors, but making sure they're used appropriately in an organization or mission. Gender advisors have to be more than just simply the people who always take the meetings with groups who identify themselves as women's groups. And finally, participation, you're right, and I can't overemphasize the importance of women's participation.
Thanks. If I may, I'll address all three. On youth especially, let me say that women, peace and security framework and resolutions, they actually served as a basis for forming. There is now a youth and peace building, and there is youth, peace and security group, and there is more dedicated work for that done within the UN, within the United Nations system. It's The Youth and Peace Building is led by Peace Building Support Office, and UN Women is actually working on youth peace and security, because that came through the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So work is going on there. It's just at the beginning, but I think we will see much more of attention to this issue in the future. And I would say a lot of what is concerning women, peace and security very much links to young women and girls, really. So it's important to start there. Then on implementation, and thank you for making all those points. I very much agree, and I didn't want to stand here at the podium and complain about lack of resources and lack of implementation and lack of commitment, but I'm glad you referred to some of these ones. Some concrete suggestions. We have suggested, why don't governments allocate 15% of their peace and security expenditure to such activities that promote gender equality. That doesn't require new resources. You just look at how you spend and budget your existing resources. And if you give funding to peacekeeping, ensure that whoever is receiving that funding takes this viewpoint into account, that it's built in. And like I said, make it an issue for every single political meeting you have. And great to hear about the evidence gathering that's going on in the EU, and Canada also doing that. So please share that one when you have evidence available, and share the lessons learned so others can learn from those ones. And maybe there is also more need for this kind of evidence communities of practice, so that there are more places where to share. And then for implementation, I still think the most important thing is the leadership. If it comes from the top leadership, if it's there at the top and you see it's important, and that leader is asking after results. I want you to give me results, what you have done. This is an important issue. I don't know if it's good to use here, but I think NATO and what they are currently doing is a good example of this. I think they have very dedicated leadership at the moment, is really making the change there. So I think that serves as a good example. In the United Nations, currently all the special representatives, so heads of the missions and deputy heads of the missions, they have in their terms of reference gender equality, promotion of women, peace and security. It's part of their compacts. So keep on asking how is it going, the implementation. The member states are there for that purpose. And then for a last question, Secretary General, should there be a woman? There absolutely should be a woman. I think it will be a huge disappointment if it's not a woman. And in New York, there have been hearings of candidates, and I think all the female candidates, including the one from Moldova, have made a really great impression. They all have appeared very competent and capable. I think they are, I think you can't say that there is no, you couldn't select, you know. I think they are all have, everybody has a little bit, and I'm probably in trouble if it's a man who got selected for a Secretary General. But.
Thank you.
I'll keep my answer really short because I see we have less than 5 minutes and still people who want to ask questions. I'll just provide a bit of context to the data problem in being able to measure the outcomes we want to measure. Certainly, for my work, the most reliable sources of data have been the national action plans and have been the NATO reports to the Gender Committee. And even then, there's a lot of gaps in the data, including for the Canadian reports from a few years back. When you try to look at the percentage of women deployed on operations, there's a little footnote that says gender is not a consideration in deployment decisions, but then it makes it really difficult to assess progress and to assess gender dynamics in the armed forces. In addition to being able to bridge that data gap, I also think it's important to better define the outcomes that we want to see. What does a successful outcome look like when it comes to the integration of women, peace, and security? I think that a lot of the reports we're seeing out there, they're very much focused on long lists of indicators and outputs. But what does the end state look like that we want to achieve?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we probably there was one more speaker. I think that's all. Oh.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anne Ovim. I'm Norway's ambassador to Canada. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists for sharing their experience, initiatives, and views with us this morning. The previous panel included discussion on the need for closer cooperation between the EU and NATO in terms of crisis management and also in fighting cyber threats and stabilization and so on. I would like to hear, and I would be very interested in hearing more about the panelists' concrete ideas of how closer cooperation between the EU and NATO can actually contribute to close the implementation gap when it comes to gender policy in the security fields. Thank you.
Could help. Okay. There are a number more. I guess I need some guidance from the organizers. I would note that the last panel did go a bit over time, but there is lunch waiting. But if I have a little indicator, we can go a little bit longer. Okay, then perhaps I'll take two more questions then. Yes, here and then, yeah.
Well, I think I can do it without the mic. My name is Niels Bo Abrahamsen. I'm Denmark's ambassador to Canada. But it was the references to Afghanistan that made me want to take the floor. I served as Denmark's ambassador to Canada to Afghanistan before coming to Canada. And I'm happy that half of my diplomats serving with me were women. Yeah. And we also had a number of soldiers and officers in the Danish armed forces there. But I didn't meet one female police officer in the Europol mission there. And I think that was a pity, because I think it would have been a great help in building the Afghan National Police if they had been able to have more female trainers, not only to train the women police officers, but also to show the male police officers that this is a gender-neutral profession in Europe and in Canada. So it's just meant as an encouragement to work on how can we make it easier for women to serve in missions in difficult countries like Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christa Offers-Beumer. I'm the Dutch Defense Attaché here in Ottawa, and I'd like to make a comment on my own personal experience in our armed forces. We now have over 12% military women in our armed forces, and it took us over years, as of 1993, to get there, and we strive in the Netherlands for 30%. And that's a good initiative for the reasons explained by the panelists. But I think it's hard to get there. Being in the armed forces over 30 years now, I've seen a variety of measures to make the military more gender equal. Some worked and some didn't. And we certainly have to keep work on it, and it progresses very slowly over the years. And we've seen that. But it's a true culture change in the military. But what we, to my ID, must not do is to push women into the military or push them up. Like every profession, it's a personal choice to join the military or to take any other job. And we must do what we're best at, and people must get the job that they're most fit for, not based on male or female, to my ID. Thank you.
Okay, so
we got one more final question here, please.
Final question.
Thank you very much. My name is Pavlos Anastasiadis. I'm the Cyprus High Commissioner here in Ottawa. I would like to commend the organizers for including this panel in the discussion. I think the role of women in peacemaking, peace building and sustaining peace has been recognized in ancient times, as it is well reflected in classical literary masterpieces from classical Greece. Whether it is complied with, it's another question. It also ties in, I would agree, with the main conclusion, I would say, from the earlier panel about the importance of resilience of society in preventing crisis, in maintaining peace. And I would fully agree with what the Deputy Minister of Canada earlier mentioned about the importance of inclusiveness and values, and the role of women in that is self-evident. But I think this panel concentrated more on the position of women in operations, in missions, in the context of the EU, the UN, and of Canada. And I think in that regard it's important to underline the value of symbolism and of example, where it shows, if you have examples, what can be done and what has been done in that area. And coming from Cyprus, I can say that we have had the first head of the UN peacekeeping mission being a woman general of Norway, Major General Christine Lund. The head of the UN mission is also a woman, and is going to be now Canada's Elizabeth Specher, who heads that mission. I would hope in that regard that it is a good omen also for finally ending the 40 years plus of foreign occupation and forcible division of my country. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of those comments. In light of the time, I'm not going to try and summarize. I'm just going to turn to the panel to make what comments they might want. I'm going to abuse my role as chair and make one aside. Much of the study and the data has demonstrated, I think, rather conclusively, and this has been mentioned, the importance of the inclusion of women in peace processes, and that leading to reaching a peace, and then the peace itself being more durable. And references, and I'd like to just reference, make a relation between that comment, those findings, and the various comments that have made about Afghanistan. And it would seem to me that we have a huge unfinished peace in Afghanistan, and that's a comprehensive peace process, and the role of women to that end. But in any event, I turn to you for comments on what the audience has said, or that, or other things, because we're essentially the concluding comments now, please.
Okay, so I guess I'll start from this end. But I wanted first to emphasize that two of the gentlemen who asked questions prefaced their question with strong statements about the importance of female representation in their respective spheres. So I do hope that you take that message with you wherever you go, and not just in venues and forums such as these when it's a specific topic of discussion. And I always am quite encouraged when I hear people like you being able to express and articulate those views based on your own experiences. So thank you for that. And I also think that for the question specifically on the deploying women in dangerous regions, looking at just a few cases, especially the most demanding cases, let's say special operations forces in Iraq or Afghanistan, and the experience that the United States has had through their all-female cultural support teams. When the recruitment call was put out that there would be an opportunity to serve by the very best alongside the very best of the armed forces, so with the Green Berets or the Rangers, there was no shortage of women who put their hands up. And so I would say probably the first step would be removing the professional barriers that do still exist for those combat positions and for those very demanding roles in volatile regions, because I think that there's lots of cases and examples to show that women will put their hands up every time.
I would also say that our experience with investigators who go and investigate the crimes, including the one you referred to, crimes committed by Daesh against women and girls, it is actually something that has been financed by Canada and some of the EU member states with Justice Rapid Response and UN Women collaboration. these investigators are women. They go right there in the middle of the most dangerous conflict areas, where conflict is going on, when they go talk directly to people. And there is a big roster of people, both women and men, but most of them women in this roster who are ready to go to the most dangerous areas, which are sometimes too dangerous for a military. So they go there. So I think women can, it's a choice also of a person. And I'm sorry if I'm taking your line, but good news for Denmark, there is a head of EUPOL is a female. It's my friend from Finland.
Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add to that last answer is, in terms of deploying women, the first step is looking to our own houses and making sure that we have our own houses in order in terms of recruitment and retention of women in our armed forces and our police forces. And I think I would agree with the defense advisor who spoke, that, or the military representative who spoke, that it's not about forcing women in or out of any organization, nor is it about, I don't think it's not a matter of quotas, but what it is it's about recruiting qualified candidates and having a strategy, a deliberate strategy to retain those candidates.
The last word.
And I will also pick up on that point, because when it comes to secondments of personnel to the EU operations, I mean, then the responsibility lies with the member states. That's to second more women and to second more senior women. So it's, as you say, it's, you know, we have to get our own houses in order. And thank you for the remark about the head of the civilian mission in Afghanistan. Indeed, EUPOL has a female head of mission, but we don't have any female operations commander of any military mission. So still work to do. When it comes to the next things I think we have to do, which would be important next steps, I was thinking about, for instance, that horizontal learning is important. I mean, there is no one-size-fits-all strategy for gender, but there is a lot more that can be taken out from comparing lessons learned and training across the CSDP. And here I was going to pick up on the point on what can we do EU-NATO, because we do have a lot of exchanges with NATO, staff-to-staff contacts and so forth. And I completely agree that NATO has a lot of very good work in this area. And certainly, I think the exchanges that we could have with NATO on this at staff level, on lessons learned and so forth, could be very useful. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, in light of the time, it falls to me simply the very happy task of thanking our panel very much and thanking you, the audience, for contributing to what I think has been a very rich discussion and has brought out a lot of evidence of a determination to really make meaningful steps to close the implementation gap. Thank you all very much.